The summer of 1924 was hot and dry, the kind that left the earth cracked and brittle underfoot. The 5 men, Fred Beck, Gabe Lefevre, John Peterson, and the Smith brothers, were seasoned prospectors, rough men who had spent years chasing gold in the mountains of Washington. They had heard the old stories about the deep forests near Mount St. Helens, legends passed down by the local native tribes, tales of shadowy figures, creatures that watched from the trees, always just out of sight. But none of them gave those stories much thought. They had a claim to work, gold to find, and nothing, man nor beast, was going to stand in their way. The first days were uneventful. The men built a rough wooden cabin at the edge of a gorge, known as Ape Canyon. It was a good spot, high enough to see trouble coming, with a thick forest behind them and a winding river below. They worked hard during the day, breaking rocks, sifting through gravel, and filling their pouches with whatever flecks of gold they could find. At night, they sat around the fire, their rifles resting against their knees. The only sounds the crackling wood and the occasional cry of an owl. But there was something about the forest that felt off. The trees seemed too still, the silence too deep. It was as if the wilderness was holding its breath, waiting. The feeling of being watched started subtly, creeping up on them like a sickness. They would glance over their shoulders, expecting to see something peering at them from the tree line. But there was never anything there. And yet, the sense of unseen eyes never left them. It was on the 4th day that Fred Beck saw it. He had left the cabin to fetch water from a nearby stream. The forest was quiet. Eerily so, the usual sounds of birds and insects strangely absent. As he knelt by the water's edge, he felt it before he saw it, that prickling sensation at the back of his neck, the feeling that something was near. He looked up, and his breath caught in his throat. Just beyond the trees, a figure stood watching him. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, covered in thick, dark hair. Its arms were unnaturally long, nearly reaching its knees, and its shoulders were broad and powerful. But it was the face that sent a chill down Fred's spine. It was almost human, but not quite. The eyes were dark, deep-set, and intelligent, and they were locked onto him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Fred's pulse thundered in his ears. Then slowly the creature tilted its head, as if studying him. Without thinking, he reached for his rifle. His hands trembled as he lifted it, but before he could talk himself out of it, he fired. The gunshot shattered the silence, echoing through the trees. The creature staggered back, letting out a sound that Fred would never forget. It wasn't an animal's cry, nor was it human. It was deep, guttural, filled with rage and something else, something almost mournful. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees, moving with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something so large. Fred ran. His legs felt weak beneath him, but he forced himself to keep moving, his breath coming in ragged gasps. When he burst into the cabin, the others jumped to their feet, their hands reaching for their rifles. "What happened?" Lefevre demanded. Fred struggled to catch his breath. "I saw it," he gasped. "I shot it." Silence fell over the cabin. Then, from the depths of the forest, a sound rose through the trees, a long, low howl. It was unlike anything they had ever heard. And then another and another. The howls came from all around them. There was more than one. The men barred the door and checked their rifles. Night fell quickly, the darkness pressing against the cabin like a living thing. At first, all was silent. Then came the first knock, a soft, deliberate tapping against the wooden walls. The sound sent a shiver through the men. Then, bang! A rock slammed against the roof, followed by another and another. The cabin shook under the force. Heavy footsteps circled the walls, and then the scratching began. Long, clawed fingers raking against the wood. Something was testing the structure, searching for a weakness. The attack came suddenly, a deafening crash against the walls, followed by a chorus of unearthly screams. The creatures were trying to break in. The men fired blindly through the window slats, their bullets tearing into the night. But the creatures only grew bolder. One of them reached through a gap in the wall, its massive arms swinging wildly. Peterson grabbed a hatchet and brought it down hard, severing 2 of its fingers. The creature let out a shriek that rattled the walls, and then silence. For a moment they dared to hope it was over. But then from the trees came a new sound, low and rhythmic, almost like chanting. Something was calling to them. And then, in the distance, they heard it. A presence deeper in the forest, something even bigger, something that made the others fall silent in deference. A new terror gripped them, whatever this was. It wasn't just an animal, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Dawn broke and the forest was quiet once more. The men stepped outside cautiously, their rifles raised. What they saw made their blood run cold. Massive footprints surrounded the cabin, some of them resembling human tracks, only far too large. Others were different, twisted, clawed, belonging to something that had no place in this world. The ground was littered with rocks, some as heavy as a man's head, hurled with terrifying force. The men packed up and left. They rode out of Ape Canyon that morning, abandoning their claim. Whatever gold lay in those hills wasn't worth their lives. Years later, Fred Beck would tell his story. Some called it a hoax, the hallucinations of men driven mad by isolation. But the local tribes knew the truth. They had always known. They called them the Mountain Devils. And to this day, some say they still wait, deep in the forests of Ape Canyon, watching, waiting for the next intruder.